We're now going to create a script that we can attach to enemy 4 that's going to get him to chase after the main player when you enter this main trigger box. So in the My Scripts folder, let's right click, choose Create and C# script, and we'll call this Enemy Attack Script, or Enemy Attack rather. That's perfectly fine. We don't need to call it script because we know it's a script. Double click on it. Okay. Now the first thing that we know is that we are going to be using the AI collections, so we have to tell Unity that we are using Unity engine.ai. Great, so now it knows. Okay, so the first things that we need to do is serialize some fields. And the first one is going to be a transform. In other words, a position in 3D space, and that's going to be of our player. Okay, next we're going to serialize again. This one is going to be a float, and we will call this one chase speed. So in other words, how fast should the character be going when he's chasing us? And I'm going to default that at around 10.5. Okay, so if our player is able to run at around 12, the enemy running at 10.5 will always be in pursuit but never quite catching us up. Okay, and that's quite important at this stage. Now I need to serialize another one, and this is going to be of a type game object, and I'll call this one patrol. Okay, and this is simply going to switch the AI for the enemy on or off, so that we're not basically getting the character to walk between waypoints while he's chasing us. Okay, so now we need some private variables. So private, this one's going to be a boolean. I'm going to call this run to player. It's false to begin with, so whenever this is true, the enemy is going to be running toward the player. Now we need to tell it to find an animator and a nav mesh. Private of type animator, we'll call anim, and private of type nav mesh agent, we'll call nav. Okay, there we go. So I think we've got everything we need at this point in time, so let's just save this. Okay, so in the start we need to tell it to get the component, so anim equals get component of type animator. Need to do the same with navigation, or the nav mesh agent rather. Nav equals get component of type nav mesh agent. Great. And we also need to tell it to set this patrol.gameObject to true when we begin. So set active to true to ensure that it's switched on so that he can be doing his patrol in between the waypoints. Okay, now after start, I'm actually going to put the on trigger enter here, so to detect when the player is close enough. Okay, private void on trigger enter collider other. I'm going to say if other dot game objects dot compare tag, and the tag that we want to compare is, and let's find it on the player, on the FPS controller, and we've got, for example, a player trigger cube. This is the tag, so trigger player, and it has to be written exactly the same way. So trigger player, and once that happens, then we can say a run to player equals true, which will obviously force the enemy to start chasing us. Now under the update, we're going to say if run to player is equal to true, then do the following. First of all, we're going to switch the patrol off. Patrol.gameObject.set active to false. Then we want to change the nav mesh agent speed. So nav.speed equals chase speed. So that will force him to then run at sort of 10.5. And then we need to tell the nav where to go, the nav mesh agent. So nav.set destination is of course the player.position. And we now want to change the animator to get the character running. So let's just save this one for now. Let's go back into Unity and let's find the enemy 4, and then let's come over to the animator. So at the moment for the enemy 4 we have basically two animations. We have walking with axe and look around with axe. Now we need that extra animation that we brought in. So that's under horror fuse characters, animations, enemy animations, and here we've got it. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in the standard run, and we're going to go from walking with axe. In fact, we're going to make a transition from either because we don't know which animation it's going to be currently playing. So we need to create a new parameter. It's going to be of a type bool. Okay, and we're going to call this one alert. It's going to be false to begin with, but obviously we're going to make a transition to standard run, make a transition to standard run again. I'm going to uncheck as to exit time. I'm going to click plus, so state alert, rather. Alert is equal to true. We're going to do the same with this one, and we're going to say when alert is equal to true. Now the idea behind this is once the enemy has actually spotted the player, he will pursue the player for the rest of the game. Okay, I'll never go back to just patrolling because now he's aware that you're there. He wants to catch you. Becomes almost like the Terminator, you know, he's unrelenting. He's never going to give up until he gets you. So obviously you have to find a weapon and try and kill the enemy if you can. So from either one of those, it's basically going to go to the standard run when alert becomes true. So now we can do that from this script. So we can say anim.set bool. The boolean that we've just created was called alert, and we're going to set that one to true. So now the character will begin running. Okay, so that's all we need for now. We'll test that in the next video. Well, actually, before we do that, I have to attach it to enemy 4, don't I? So assets, my scripts, and enemy attack. So let's just drag that onto enemy 4. Okay, so the player, we need to tell it that it is the first person controller. So let's drag that in there. And the patrol is on the enemy, it's the nav cube. Okay, so let's just drag that in there. Great. So I'm wondering if, to be honest, because we're only testing, let me just switch this off, go back into the script. So we're only testing the run, to be honest. So let's set this to false to begin with. So we'll switch it off. We don't want it affecting anything. And we can just comment this line out, which will be fine. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Now I'm just going to rotate this enemy character so he's looking down in that direction. And at the moment, if I were to run this, for example, at the moment, the enemy would certainly chase the player, but he would actually run straight through the player because there's nothing currently stopping the enemy from passing through the player. So a good way to combat that is to actually include one of these nav mesh agents on the player character as well. One nav mesh agent cannot run through another nav mesh agent. They will basically stop each other, which is exactly what we want. So let's go back up to the FPS controller, go to component and its navigation and a nav mesh agent. Okay, now if we get a little bit closer to the player, we'll see that it's added that nav mesh agent there, which is this cylinder type object. The base offset we're going to make roughly about 0.7, and just so that it's not right on the floor. Okay, and the actual radius 0.5 at the moment. I'm going to extend this a little bit. I'm going to make it a bit bigger, about 1. Okay, that means that the enemy can get no closer than that distance from the player. And I might even, actually saying that, I might go down to the enemy character, enemy 4, and just make his radius a little bit bigger as well, maybe about 1. Okay, so now it basically cancels each other out, so he should be a good distance away from the player, ready to start attacking. Now at the moment he's just going to constantly be running when he gets close to the player, so we need to tell it to actually, when it gets close to the player, to stop running and start attacking. So let's modify the script. Let's go back into the enemy attack script, and we need a few more fields at the top, so I'm going to serialize a field, and this one's going to be a float. I'm going to call this attack distance, which equals, I might try about 2.6. We can always change that in the inspector if we need to. So in other words, when the character gets 2.6 units away from the player, he will then start attacking. Now, in fact, instead of putting this under private, I'm going to put it at the top. I'm going to put public for now, just to remind myself that I actually need to privatize this later. And I'm going to call this, it's going to be of a type float, and I'm going to call this distance to player. Okay, Unity has to store this as a value. How far away from the player is the enemy, so that it can make sense of this attack distance. If it doesn't have anything to compare it to, then that is not going to make sense at all. So under the updates, then we and as long as if run to player is true, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to say distance to player. Distance to player, there it is, equals a new vector3, so it's vector3 dot distance. And remember, vector3 is basically just x, y and z coordinates, and it's going to base this on player dot position in relation to transform dot position. Oh, I spelled that wrong. Transform dot position, which is obviously the enemy's position in space. So transform is always whatever this script is attached to, that position, to the player position. It's gonna store that as a number. Okay, now we need to say, just underneath here, I'll just put a space so that we can see it. If distance to player, there it is, distance to player, is less than attack distance, then what we're going to do is we're going to change the anim. Now at the moment we don't have an attack animation, so what we're going to do is attack anim set ball alert, and we're going to set this one to false. Oh, spelled that wrong. False. So in order for this to work, we now need to go back to the animator window in order to set up this false boolean. So we've got our enemy selected. Let's go back to the animator, and we've currently only got these two, which is alert equals true. So let's say we go back to a walking. So let's make a transition. Let's come back and let's just uncheck as exit time. We're going to go to alert, and we're going to make this one false. Okay, we're only using this for now because we don't have an attack animation at the moment. That is going to be in the next section. But when we do have an attack animation, obviously instead of going in this way, it's going to go in that direction to the attack animation, which will sit there. This is simply for preview purposes at the moment. Okay, great, so we've done that. Now we need to tell it that else if, and we need to be quite specific on what the if is. Distance to player is greater than attack distance. And simply anim set bool, and it's obviously alert goes back to true. So in other words, it should start running again. Great. Okay, so that should be all set up. And what I could do in the next video at this stage is basically just try this out. So I'll do a walkthrough and see how this is working so far.